now we're going to move a little bit. We're going to raise the bar once again, and it's going to be another master class. And trust me, when I say, take it from the master of ceremony, when I say master class, I mean a masterpiece. We are going to have another master class that is looking at social media. What do young girls and teens experience online? And we're going to have two amazing speakers, including our president, and that will be Helen Lee, together with Anne-Gabrielle Heilbronner, the president of the Women's Forum for the Economy and Society. And Urban Lee is the founder of Reboot. Let's give them a round of applause as they join us on stage. Thank you, Madam President.
So, do you remember this story of the fisherman and the genie from the Arabian Nights? You know, a poor fisherman discovers a strange bottle in his net. It was sealed with lead, but he pried it open with his knife. And suddenly, thick smoke poured out of the opening, and an enormous and terrifying genie appeared. But though the poor fisherman had freed him, the genie said he must kill him. But first, he would grant him one favor. So the fisherman pretended to be puzzled. How could such an enormous creature fit inside such a tiny bottle? He challenged the genie to prove that he could do it. The arrogant monster turned to smoke and slipped back into the bottle. The elated fisherman quickly replaced the cap, trapping the genie once more inside. What if I told you that the actual lesson of this tale is this? If you are smart enough, educated enough, you can put the genie back into the bottle and be free of its power. Education is a superpower. This is why the Women's Forum put education at the heart of this event. Social media and the internet are formidable forces that we have released upon ourselves and no longer control. And it is today's youth, particularly girls and young women, who are paying the price of letting the monster out of the bottle. Young people look for acceptance, approval from others. Until recently, most role models were within our local communities. But today's social media asks for judgment and approval from thousands of people that we have never met. Our new besties live on Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok. We spend more time interacting with these virtual friends than we do with our real-life friends or even our own families. We live on our smartphones. They are invited to the table, on vacation, on camping trips, on concerts, wedding, and face it, even into our bathrooms. The result? The social cues and role models that we used to count on to navigate relationship with others have been replaced by slimming filters, emojis, avatars, like buttons, and influencers. Social media, as we know, is less than 15 years old, but it has rocked our world. We experience the real world less and less. Our discernment, our sense of right and wrong, real or fake, has been given to bots, algorithms, and virtual experts who are unable or unwilling to take responsibility for the power that they hold over others. As a $10 billion a year industry, it is a topic of great interest to the Women's Forum and to all of us. influencing can offer new business models and greater visibility to young women in business. It also carries great responsibility. It is a level of responsibility that most influencers are not ready or prepared to accept. When we talk about education, our priorities this year, social media and influencing must be part of the discussion. We need to understand how much influence social media personalities actually have over young people today. So, with Helen Bouygues and the Reboot Foundation, we surveyed over 3,000 women and teen girls from the US, the UK, France, and Brazil. And the report that is released today by the Reboot Foundation and the Women's Forum for the Economy and Society shows that there is something toxic about, the relationship between teenage girls and the influencers they follow on social media. 70% of teen girls form their views on beauty and fashion and lifestyle and careers based on influencer content. In Brazil, the number tops 80%. Alarmingly, many influencers do not really think about or care whether their content is harming their followers, even though they themselves are women. The frank discussion of what we have discovered will guide us this morning, will shape the education we need to inform our thinking, and I will leave the floor to Helen Bouygues because she will explain to you what she has discovered and help you maybe put the genie back into the bottle. Helen, floor is yours.
Thank you, Anne-Gabrielle. I'm excited to be here today to discuss the findings conducted by the Women's Forum and the Reboot Foundation. I'd like to start with a short activity that will enable you to compare with the women and teens that we took part of this survey. But for this activity, I need for you to take out your phones, your laptops, anything that can connect with the internet, please. So go ahead and get your phones out. I know it's very rare that in a forum like this we actually encourage you to take your phones out. But when you scan the QR code, please enter Masterclass social media so that you get to the right site, please. And when I launch the questions, you will have approximately 15 seconds to respond so that we can try to give you live, real-time summary of your responses. As Anne-Gabrielle mentioned, we surveyed over 3,000 young women and girls, as well as older women, as part of this survey, with dozens of questions. But for time purposes, we are going to focus on 10 to compare and contrast whether or not this group is very different from those that we surveyed. So, is everyone ready to begin? I'm going to give a few more seconds before we move on to our first question so that you can all log on. Okay, let's move on to the first question, please. No? Can I ask somebody in the audience if you see your first question on your screen of Slido? Great, okay, then let's get started. So the first question is about your frequency of social media use. So please type your answers. So the first question, I see this group had 30% 1 to 2 hours, 22% 2 to 3 hours, which is not that different from our survey. Our survey had 51% at over 1 hour per day, 28% at 1 to 2 hours, and 23% at 2 to 3 hours. The next question is on the impact of social media on your quality of life. Please go ahead and vote. Wow. I waste a lot of time scrolling through my social media at 78%. Not very different from our survey group, which was at 68%. The only difference I see is I have learned a lot from various topics from my social media. Our survey group had 79%. I can see that you guys are slightly lower at 51% relative to our survey group. Let's move on to the next question, please. The next question is about the emotions you associate with social media use. I love these Slidos when we see all the numbers moving around. Overwhelmingly, the group is indicating exhausted and anxious, but satisfied as well. So there is a bit of dichotomy on the two topics that don't seem to be necessarily comparative in emotions. For the survey group, smart was actually the number 1 response, and exhausted was number 2, and anxious was number 3. Next question, please. The next question is about how many influencers you actually follow. Let's see how many of you still have the genie in the box. %64% follow influencers of some sort. So that number is actually lower than the survey that we did, because our survey showed over 70% actually follow some form of influencer. The next question is about the degree to which you trust influencer content. Next question, please. %46% trusting in some form, or 54% turn it around, not trusting as much. Our group, the survey group, said about 58% were indeed cautious as well. The next question, please, which is about how much respect you have for influencers. Not very different from our survey group. Some respect was around 39%, but not much respect or no respect was at 37%. So this group's profile is not that different from our survey. The next question, please, which is about whether or not you're interested in influencing as a career. Maybe some of you are already influencers. So this is where this group is very different from our survey. Our survey actually showed almost the exact opposite of what this group is saying to us. The next question, please. The next question is about the impact influencers you follow have on your opinion and your beliefs. And particularly about fashion and beauty. And we selectively, deliberately did not include like sciences and whatnot, which I'll get to in my presentation. So here again, the Women's Forum group is a little bit different from our survey. Our survey group had 62% for very important or moderately important. So apparently this group not only doesn't really want to become an influencer, but also does not believe too much in terms of the beliefs and opinions of the followers. We have 2 more questions, please, and then we'll get to the topic. The next question, please. The next question is about how you feel if influencers disappeared from your social media feeds, i.e., there would be no longer any feeds from social media influencers. What sentiment would that provide you? So your number 1 is relieved. Number 2 is bored. So again, there's a bit of dichotomy in that. And 3 out of the loop. In our survey group, number 1 was actually happy at 21%, equivalent to good about myself at 21%. And bored was actually at 20%. But there is a bit of differences between teens and adults on this question that I'll get to. Finally, our last question to test this group. This is about your opinion on the impact influencers can have on the self-esteem of women and girls. Well, I think this qualifies as unanimous almost, the way you answered your questions, at over 95%. Our survey group for strongly agree and agree was over 80%. So I think the general perception and the appreciation of the dangers that social media has is not a surprise to anyone. That was very interesting. I appreciate you for spending the time to do this survey, because we actually saw a lot of commonalities with the survey, as I tried to indicate you by question. Now, I think the major difference is clearly the impact influencers have on your lives in this room is probably a little bit less than the survey group that we looked at. And just as a reminder, we surveyed over 3,000 women in countries Brazil, the US, UK, and France. Of course, surveys produce a lot of statistical data, and a lot of it is quite useful. But to me, this survey is really interesting because of the dichotomy of the sensitivity of small differences in questions and what that changes in terms of results. But allow me to highlight some of our key findings for the survey that the Women's Forum and the Reboot Foundation did together. Our first finding is that teen girls indeed have an unhealthy relationship with social media influencers. By large margins, teens are much more likely to follow influencers, to trust their endorsements and recommendations, which is a little bit different from how adult women view and interact with influencers. There's been quite a bit of research on the effect about social media and self-esteem and their body images, and generally speaking, as you know, researchers have found consequential negative effects on teens, especially girls. And the girls in our survey actually know this. They seem to be very well aware that social media content can be harmful. 3 out of 4 girls that we surveyed agree that social media can be harmful for them, and more than half and up to 85% agreed that social media is actually a waste of time. And less than 20% believe that they actually have control over their feeds. And yet, 60% of them feel that they have a positive connection to the personalities they follow, even though there is no real-life interaction or personal relationship with these influencers. The girls are attached to the influencer. These connections are what psychologists often call parasocial, meaning that they are one-sided attachments. Girls are attached to the influencer, but the influencers are not attached to the girls. I understand that teens have swooned over famous people for as long as there have been teens and famous people. Having grown up in Korea, Sophie Marceau was the idol in the region, so we all wanted her hairstyle and her outfits, and if she had an Instagram account back then, I probably would have been an avid follower. But the difference today is that fandom is not as innocent as that. The influencer-follower paradigm is a business model. It is structured and optimized to make money for corporations and the influencers at the expense of the follower. Young women trust influencer endorsements, 44% in France, 59% in Brazil, with UK and the US somewhere in between. And these young girls buy products thanks to these endorsements. Girls interviewed even felt bored if social media did not have content from influencers. Now, I said that a moment ago, that girls are attached to an influencer, but the influencers are not attached to girls. What do I mean by this? To put it bluntly, a good number of the influencers we surveyed just don't care about the well-being of their teen followers. How do we know that? Because we asked them. The survey conducted by the Women's Forum and the Reboot Foundation did include over 1,000 influencers in our survey, and we put it to them directly. If you knew that the content you post causes your followers to feel bad about themselves, would you still be active as a social media influencer? Would it surprise you to learn that 1 out of every 3 influencers said that they would continue to post? American influencers were probably even a little bit more callous. 42% of them said that they would continue with their work. This is exactly like cigarette companies pushing ads. This has to be a wake-up call for every parent or anyone who knows or cares about a girl who spends a lot of time on social media. We need to help them understand the power imbalance in the influencer-follower relationship. We need to teach girls that when they click that follow button on Instagram, they're entering into a business relationship. They must understand that this can lead them to making poor choices or having unhealthy feelings about themselves. This is why the Reboot Foundation has supported efforts here in France and in the US to place new restrictions and regulations on social media use for teens. We've advised leaders and governments and have recommended a ban on digital advertising aimed at teens. We believe social media apps should come with warning labels, just as we do with tobacco products, and that teens younger than 15 should not be allowed on social media. I'm hopeful that as these girls grow and become older, perhaps their attachment to influencers will fade. We saw some of this in the data. Older women were much less likely to follow influencers, to respect influencers, and to listen to influencers than were teens, a little bit like this community. But trust by older women of influencer endorsements were even halved compared to girls in the UK and France, and significantly lower for the US as well. But that doesn't mean that older women don't have issues with social media as well. Indeed, they do. And this leads me to mention another key finding from our joint research with the Women's Forum. Many older women just can't quit their influencer. We saw several conflicting responses from the women we surveyed. So I would describe this as a love-hate relationship that women seem to have with their influencer. On one hand, they told us that they wanted less content from influencers in their feeds. Over half of those surveyed said this. They said they would feel happy or good about themselves if their feeds contained no content from influencers at all. But on the other hand, every woman that we surveyed do follow influencers. They said that they don't have much respect for influencers. Less than 12% have respect, and if you take out Brazil, that number goes down to 5%. Brazil is interesting because it is clearly a country that is an outlier in usage and appreciation of social media. Overall, women in Brazil spend far more time on social media than women in other countries. 47% are what we deem as heavy users. Heavy users is defined as over 3 hours per day on social media. The next closest country was the US at 31%. And if you even look closer at the data, you'll see that 27% of the women in Brazil told us that they spend at least 5 hours a day on social media. Where do they find this time? So whilst in general, older women don't have much respect for influencers, feel that social media is a waste of time, and don't trust influencers as much as girls, why are we consuming so much of it? Upwards of 60% of women acknowledge that social media personalities have at least a moderate amount of influence on their opinions when it comes to beauty and fashion. How does one hold disdain for a profession while simultaneously devouring what they're serving? To me, these results are very similar to a report that the Reboot Foundation published in the summer of 2021, where 40% of social media users said they would pick social media over TV, cars, and even their domestic pets. Social media is exactly like addiction, like smoking. You know it's bad for you, but you keep doing it anyway. Smokers are addicted to nicotine, and social media users, their screens. And I think this is why our survey data shows this love-hate relationship that many women have with social media. They acknowledge it makes them feel bad. They admit it's a large waste of time, but they keep scrolling, following, liking, and subscribing, searching for that next hit of dopamine. Now onto the influencers that Anne-Gabrielle mentioned, and influencing as a career. Another key finding, influencing is not a great career path, yet significant numbers of teens worldwide want to pursue it. The percentage of teens and young women who expressed an interest in becoming influencers varied from country to country, but overall, it is an overwhelming number. Interest was again strongest in Brazil, where 51% of teen girls said they were interested in becoming social media influencers if money was no object. In the US, 42%. In the UK, 34%, and in France, 21%. I repeat, 50% or even 21%. Could you imagine if these were percentages for other professions like in science? One reason is that girls see influencing as a lucrative career, when in fact it is not. Both teens and adults in our survey overestimated the potential income influencing can yield. 63% of our teens and more than 70% of women said that they believe that influencers make enough money to support themselves. Well, it isn't, and at least not for most influencers. While it's true there are clearly influencers that make considerable sums of money, but those people are a minority. The vast majority of the influencers who took the survey, about 8 in 10, 80%, said they are unable to support themselves through influencing. Further, only 29% describe their social media work as a full-time job. In reality, the money isn't there, and most influencers are unable to do it as a full-time job. It sounds a little bit like show business, doesn't it, where that starlet who lives in Hollywood finds themselves waiting tables to pay their rent. Then there is the mental toll of working in an industry that few people respect. Only 17% of the female influencers said they feel a lot of respect from others of the work that they do. So to sum it all up, for the vast majority of girls, the money won't be there, and if you do make it, few will respect your career choice. This is not a winning formula for a long and healthy career. And yet so many women would pursue it if given the chance. As a society, we need to ask ourselves why that is. What messages are we sending our daughters that make them think that this is worthy of their time and talents? One last thing on this topic, and I think it's really important to note. Young women who do pursue influencing can expect to be harassed. Influencers report online harassment at much higher rates than others. Across all the countries that we surveyed, influencers experienced harassment twice as often as a typical female social media user. Incidentally, French influencers had very high rates of harassment at 36%, second only to the US at 38%. And even more unfortunately, here is something I found to be very scary. Roughly 1 in 4 influencer, 26%, said they've experienced online harassment that then spilled over to real life. This is a real element of danger. The idea that young women have that they can keep their online lives separate from their in-person lives is just not accurate. As a woman, that's scary. I've covered a lot of ground this morning and thrown a lot of numbers out at you. But as final words, I want to leave you with some thoughts on what can we do as mothers, business leaders, educators, and people who care and want to open doors for young girls and create a more equal and just society. I started the Reboot Foundation in 2018 to elevate critical thinking and to promote richer, more reflective thought through all levels of society. And I believe that an important way to help teens to better understand influencing is to teach them how to get better critical thinkers and have stronger media literacy skills. We must teach our daughters how to think logically, how to analyze, how to think for themselves and effectively evaluate sources online, how to be skeptical about what they see and read online, how to spot when they're being manipulated from an influencing industry whose only objective is to profit from us. And if we can teach our daughters to think, really think critically about the world around them, then at least we will have given them the best tools to survive in the jungle of social media. Once again, I thank Anne-Gabrielle and the Women's Forum for this collaborative effort in conducting this survey. Thank you very much.